Hi everyone, Nick Giles here today, and I want to talk about the second myth in my series of 10 videos about property leasing in New South Wales and issues around tenants and landlords. And the second myth is the issue of increases in rent. And the myth goes something like this: if I'm a landlord and the expenses around my property rise, then I should raise my rent in order to cover those expenses. So, why is this a myth? Well, the reason it's a statement that is untrue is because it misunderstands those two elements. One, the expenses around my property as a property investor, and secondly, what determines the rent for my property, and moreover, what determines whether I should increase the rent or not. Firstly, the issue of expenses at a property. Now, these can be around maintenance, these can be around utilities, these can be around interest rates increasing my mortgage costs, or all sorts of different reasons that might affect the expenses around owning an investment property. And these things are things that should be dealt with when you acquire investment property, when you analyze whether a property works as a strong investment property. These are all things that need to be considered, and they certainly are changeable over time. But they don't bear a relation directly with the amount of rent a tenant pays for your property. Let's look at the market rent for a property. How do we determine market rent? Well, we determine market rent based on looking at the position that the property is placed in when it comes to competing against other properties and what a tenant will happily pay to lease a property from you. Now, I'd go a bit further than that and suggest that it's only what a high quality tenant will pay you for your property, not what any tenant will pay you. Now, that amount of rent doesn't bear any relationship with the expenses around your property. So when we talk about rent increasing to cover expenses, we're not really talking about that. The only thing that needs to be looked at when considering an increase in rent, if you're a landlord, is whether your property is significantly behind the marketplace and needs to be increased in order to match where the market is at a given time. It's no secret in Sydney that rents generally rise over time. They tend not to rise in a straight line. They tend to rise in a little bit bumps and very inconsistent amounts. And it's often advisable to increase rents in very small amounts over a long period of time, rather than one big lump sum amount at the end of a period of not increasing rents. But it's really critical to look at what the marketplace is positioned in right now. If my property is vacant tomorrow, what is the rent that I would achieve and how would I justify that rent? These are things that are really best off considered by your property manager, and they bear no real relationship with the expenses around the property itself. So that's the key thing here today. Regarding rent increases, I look forward to doing a third video with all of you shortly and addressing another property myth in the leasing world in New South Wales. All the best.